The note was in my hand before I knew a hand had touched me. That is how good it was. I have stood the King's Gate at Harlowmere for 19 years, and in 19 years no one has put a thing into my fist without my knowing it was coming. A drunk once tried to slide a coin between my fingers for a laugh, and I felt the cold of it 3 seconds before it landed. A boy once dared his friends he could untie my chin strap, and I knew the weight of his arm rising from 4 feet away. I am paid to know. I am paid to stand at the seam of the world, where the street ends and the palace begins, and to feel every small wrong before it grows teeth. But this I did not feel until it was done. A woman in a gray coat came along the line of us, the way 100 people came past every hour, slow, looking up at the gilded railing and the stone lions and the men in red who did not look back at them. She did not stop. She did not even slow. As her shoulder drew level with mine, her gloved hand passed an inch from the white of my glove, and when it had passed there was a folded square of paper pressed flat against my palm, held there by 2 of my own curled fingers as though I had always been holding it. I had not moved. The crowd had not seen. Whoever was meant to be watching her had seen a woman walk a straight line past a row of statues and look at none of them. That was the first thing the note told me before I had read a word of it. It told me she was afraid of being watched. It told me she had practiced. A person who is not afraid hands you a paper. A person who is afraid teaches her own hand to lie. I will tell you what I was thinking behind a face that showed nothing, because that is the only part of me that was free to do anything at all. I was thinking, do not look down. Whoever frightened this woman is in this crowd, and the worst thing I can do is drop my eyes to my hand, because then his eyes follow mine, and then he knows what she has done. So I kept my chin level and my gaze fixed on the middle distance the way I have fixed it through rain and heat and one long state funeral, and I closed my hand the last small fraction, and I waited. She walked on, I let her go. Every part of me that was still a man wanted to call her back, to turn and find her face, to ask what was wrong, and every part of me that was a guardsman knew that turning was the one thing that would undo her. So I gave her the only gift I had. I stood as if nothing had happened. I let the watchers believe their watching had worked. Then I had to read a note without looking at it, in front of the world. You learn small tricks in 19 years on a gate. You learn to read your own watch by the angle of the sun. You learn to count a crowd without moving your head. And you learn that a man may bring his white glove up to adjust the strap beneath his chin. A thing the rules allow, a thing tourists film 100 times a day, because it is the only motion we are permitted, and that in the half-second the hand is near the face, the eyes may drop to it and back without a soul being the wiser. I brought my hand up. I touched the strap, and in the gap between my fingers I saw 3 words she had written small and hard, pressed so deep the pencil had nearly torn the paper. They mean her harm. That was all I had room to see. I lowered my hand to my side. My face did not change. But something old and cold had woken under my ribs, the thing that wakes in a man when a stranger trusts him with the worst sentence she knows how to write, and trusts him because he is the one man in the square who is not allowed to walk away. I will tell you what those 3 words did to me standing there. They did not make me afraid. Fear is a luxury for men who can move. They made me patient in a way that hurts, because now I had a wrong I could not yet see, a victim I could not yet name, and a watcher I could not yet find, and the only tool I had was the one tool I have ever had. I could stand, and I could see, and I could decide when at last to stop being a statue and become a man. So I began to see. It is a strange thing to turn the whole of your attention onto a crowd without turning your eyes, but the Post teaches it. You learn the square the way a fisherman learns a stretch of river, where the current runs fast, where it pools, where a thing that does not belong will snag. I let my gaze stay dead ahead and I read the edges of it. The pastry seller at the corner. The 2 old men on the bench who came every day to argue. The river of visitors flowing up from the bridge, phones lifted, children on shoulders. And among all of it, the ones who did not flow. There were three who did not flow. A man in a good dark coat stood near the base of the left lion with his back half to me, and he was not looking at the palace. People who come to a palace look at the palace. He was looking down the line of the railing toward the visitors' entrance, where the small gate let families in to walk the lower garden, and his stillness was the wrong kind of stillness. Mine is the stillness of a man at rest inside his discipline. His was the stillness of a man waiting for a thing to happen that he already knows the shape of. 20 feet from him, a younger one leaned against the railing with his phone up as if filming, but the phone never moved to follow anything, and a phone that films a palace moves. It pans the towers, it finds the flag. His did not. It pointed at the visitor's gate and held. And the third I almost missed, because he had done what the woman had done. He had made himself ordinary. He stood in the line for the lower garden with a folded map, a visitor among visitors, except that he did not shuffle forward when the line shuffled, and he did not look at his map, and twice his head turned a fraction toward the dark-coated man, as if checking a clock. He could not afford to be caught reading. 3 men, one watching the gate, one filming the gate, one inside the line at the gate. And somewhere beyond that gate, in the lower garden where the families walked among the rose beds and the fountain, was a her, and they meant her harm. I did not yet know who she was, but I knew the shape of the thing now, the way you know a storm by the color of the light before the first drop falls. They were not here to harm a stranger at random. Random men do not post 3 watchers and rehearse. They were here for one person, one who was somewhere past that small gate, and they were waiting for what? For her to come out where the crowd thinned. For a moment when she would be between the garden and the street, away from the families, close to the road where a car could wait. And the woman in the gray coat had known all of this, and could not say it aloud, because to say it aloud where one of the 3 could hear was to die for it, or to make it happen faster. So she had written 3 words and given them to the one man who could not be made to look away, and she had walked on, and now it was mine. I have thought a great deal since about how she chose me. Not me, the man. She did not know me, and I will never know her name. She chose the post. She chose the red coat because the red coat is the one thing in that square that the watchers cannot account for. They can buy a policeman or guess he is not looking. They have planned around men who move, men who have lunch, men who turn their heads. They cannot plan around a thing that does not move at all, because a thing that does not move gives them nothing to read. And there is a darker truth folded inside the bright one. She chose me because she had no one else. A person with money and friends and safe doors does not press a note into a stranger's glove on a public gate. You do that when every other door has shut, when the people who should have helped were the ones who frightened her, when the institutions that are supposed to catch the falling have already let her fall once. She had come down to the last thing in the city she could still believe in, which was a man in a red coat who, the stories said, would not be moved, and she had bet her friend's life that the stories were true. I have carried that bet ever since. It is a heavy thing to be the last thing a frightened person believes in. It does not make you proud. It makes you very quiet and very careful, because if the stories had been wrong, if I had been only a tin soldier after all, only a costume on a stand, then she had spent her last hope on nothing, and the next person to need the red coat would have nothing left to believe. I have stood this gate through a great deal. I have stood it while a man screamed in my face that I was a tin soldier and not a real one. I have stood it while a famous and powerful person, used to the world rearranging itself around him, ordered me to step aside so his photograph would be cleaner, and I did not step aside, and the world did not end. I have learned that my stillness is not nothing. My stillness is a wall, and walls decide what passes and what does not. The question that morning was no longer whether I would move. It was when and how, so that the wall came down on the right side of these 3 men and not the wrong one. Because here is the trap a guardsman lives inside, and it is worth your understanding it. I cannot leave my post on a suspicion. If every red coat on every gate could abandon his post because a stranger pressed him a frightening word, the gates would mean nothing, and a clever man would empty a gate by frightening the man who holds it. The discipline that makes me trustworthy is the same discipline that ties my hands. I could not run into that garden shouting. I could not seize the dark-coated man on 3 words and a feeling. If I was wrong, I had abandoned the king's gate on a scrap of paper, and every gate after me is weaker for it. If I was right, and I moved too soon or too loud, the 3 of them scattered into the crowd, and the her went home thinking nothing had happened, and the next morning it happened. So I did the hardest thing the post has ever asked of me. I stood still and I worked. There is a relief procedure. Every 2 hours a sergeant of the guard walks the line, and the sentries are changed, marched off and marched on with a great show of stamping and presenting arms. The thing the tourists love, the small ceremony of the swap. The next change was not due for 40 minutes. 40 minutes is a long time when a woman has written they mean her harm into your hand. But there is one thing a sentry may do at any time without breaking his post. One signal built into the discipline precisely, so that a man who cannot speak can still raise the alarm. If a sentry sees a true threat, he comes to attention with a sharpness out of rhythm with the hour, and he stamps once, hard, the heel driven down, and any guardsman within sight or sound knows that the still man has seen a thing the rest of us have not. It is rare. In 19 years I have given it twice. Both times it was real. The men who trained me told me, the stamp is your voice. Save it for when your voice would cost a life. But I could not stamp yet. A stamp would bring the sergeant of the guard at a march, and a march is loud and bright and visible. And the moment the dark-coated man saw red coats moving with purpose he would know, and he would signal his fellows, and the her in the garden would be the loose end they tidied first. The stamp was a hammer. I needed, for a few minutes more, to be a needle. So I used the only quiet I had. Corporal Aldous Wren stood the inner post behind me in the arch where the tourists could not see him, the man who watches the gate that the gate man's back is turned to. I could not call to him. But twice an hour the inner sentry and the gate sentry exchange a glance to confirm all is well, a flick of the eyes, nothing a visitor would catch. The next exchange was mine to use. When Wren's eyes found mine, I held them a beat too long. 1 beat. And then I did the small thing we had drilled 100 times and never once needed in earnest. I turned my open hand a quarter turn against my thigh, palm outward for half a second, fingers spread the sign for see. See what I see. And then with my eyes alone, slow as a clock hand, I looked once to the dark-coated man at the lion and back, and once to the visitor's gate and back. I watched understanding move across a disciplined face that showed almost nothing, the way I knew my own showed almost nothing. Wren's jaw set. His eyes made the same journey mine had made, edge to edge, and snagged where mine had snagged. He had them now. 2 of us seeing was worth 10 of me seeing alone, because now if one of us had to move, the other still held the gate, and the wall did not fall. Wren had a thing I did not have. Wren could step back into the arch out of sight for the length of a breath, and in the arch was the small brass panel and the wire that ran to the guardroom and the duty officer's desk. He could not shout. But he could press a thing twice. The signal that meant come quiet and come ready. Not the bells and the boots, but the plain-clothes men who walk the garden paths in soft shoes and good coats, and look like fathers and look like nobody. The watch you never see until you need them. He held my eyes 1 more beat. Then he was gone into the shadow of the arch, and I was alone at the gate again, and the dark-coated man at the lion had noticed nothing. Because there had been nothing to notice but 2 statues looking at each other the way statues do. Now I had to buy time, and I had to learn the her. The line at the visitor's gate moved. A family came out from the lower garden, a man with a sleeping toddler on his shoulder and a woman folding a stroller, and behind them, alone, walked a young woman with her arms wrapped around a leather folder held to her chest like a shield. She was perhaps 30. She wore a plain dark dress and flat shoes and no jewelry, the clothes of someone trying not to be looked at, and she was failing, because she was beautiful in the way that frightened people are beautiful, all the softness burned off, every nerve showing. She came out of the garden and stopped at the top of the steps where the path met the open square, and she looked left, and she looked right, and I watched her see the dark-coated man at the lion and go very still. She knew him. The whole of her changed when she saw him. Her arms tightened on the folder. Her chin came up the way a person's chin comes up when they have decided to be brave and have no idea how. And I understood in that one look most of what I had not understood before. She was not a stranger to these men. She had something they wanted, the folder. I would have wagered the gate on it. And she had come to the palace because the palace was the one place in the city they could not simply take it from her. The lower garden is open to the public, but it is the king's ground, and the king's ground is watched, and a man cannot drag a woman into a car off the king's ground without the king's men taking an interest. She had walked into the one square in the city where 3 armed men had to wait and wait for her to step off the safe ground and back into theirs. And the woman in the gray coat, I understood her now too. She had not been a victim. She had been a warning sent ahead. A friend, a sister, a colleague, someone who could not stay because to stay was to be marked, who had come to the gate and pressed 3 words into the one set of hands in the square that belonged to the crown and not to any of those 3 men. They mean her harm. Not me. Her. The woman with the folder, frozen at the top of the steps. The dark-coated man pushed off the base of the lion and began, slowly, to drift toward the foot of the steps. Not fast. A man with all the time in the world. The young one with the phone lowered it and slid it into his coat and moved, just as slowly, to put himself between the steps and the open mouth of the side street where, I had no doubt at all, a car sat with its engine warm. The third left the line with his folded map, and angled to cut off the long way round. They were closing, slow as a tide but closing, and the woman at the top of the steps saw it and did not move, because there was nowhere to move that was not toward one of them. And I could not yet move either. The plainclothes watch were coming, but they were not here. Wren was back at the inner post. I had felt him return to my blind side the way you feel a door close in a house you know. We had 2 red coats, 3 closing men, 1 frightened woman, and a crowd of innocents between all of us who must not, whatever happened, be frightened into a stampede that would do the work of these men for them. 40 feet. That was the distance from my post to the foot of those steps. 40 feet of cobblestone I am forbidden to cross, except in the gravest need. 40 feet that might as well have been the sea. The woman with the folder did the bravest thing I saw that day. She came down the steps, not toward the men, toward me. She had seen what the gray-coated woman must have told her to look for. The gate, the red coats, the one place she might run that her hunters could not follow without becoming themselves the hunted. She came down the steps fast and walked straight up the cobbles toward the king's gate with her folder clutched to her chest. And the 3 men's slow tide broke into something faster, because she had read the board the same as they had, and was making for the only safe square on it. She reached the rail not 8 feet from me. Close enough that I could see the pulse going in her throat, close enough to hear her breathe. She did not look at me, she had the sense not to, but she stood with her back to the gilded railing and her face to the square, as a person stands who has decided that whatever comes will have to come at her from the front, and she waited, the way I had waited, for the world to decide what it was going to do. The dark-coated man came up the cobbles and stopped 6 feet from her, and he smiled, and he said her name. I will not write the name. It does not matter, and she would not want it written. He said her name the way a man says a name he intends to be the last kind word before something unkind. And he said, gently, that there was a car, and that her uncle was so worried, and that all of this could be sorted out quietly if she would just come and talk. And he held out his hand. Every word of it was a lie wearing the clothes of concern, and the worst kind of liar is the gentle one, because the crowd around us heard a worried friend and a difficult young woman, and not one of them reached for a phone. He had built it so that if she screamed, she was the hysteric, and he was the patient man trying to help. He had built it so that the only thing that could break it was a witness the crowd would believe over him. He had not counted on the witness being made of stone. She did not take his hand. She said, in a voice that shook and did not break, that she was not going anywhere, that there were people in the palace expecting her, that she had only to call out and the guard would come. And he smiled wider because he knew the guard. He knew the guard does not come. He had stood in this very square, I am certain of it, and watched men scream and slap and mock the red coats, and watched the red coats stand like furniture. And he had built his whole gentle mourning on the one fact every clever, cruel man in this city thinks he knows, that the king's guard will not break protocol for anything. He took a step toward her. He reached for her arm, and that was the gravest need. I stamped. I want you to understand what that one stamp was, because it was the whole of 19 years coming down through my heel into the king's stone. It was not a small thing, and it was not a quiet thing. It was the crack of an iron heel driven down with the full weight of a grown man behind it, on flagstones laid to ring, and it went across that square like a rifle shot. Every head turned. The dark-coated man froze with his hand 6 inches from her arm. And in the half-second of stillness that one sound bought me, the half-second where 3 guilty men and 100 innocent ones all turned to find the source of a sound like the end of the world, I came off my post. I am not permitted to. I will say that plainly. The standing order is iron. The gate sentry holds the gate. But the order beneath the order, the one they teach you last and quietest, after you have proven you will obey the first one for years, is this. You hold the gate because the gate protects the people, and when the people are the gate, you go to them. The post is not the patch of stone. The post is the thing the stone is for. I crossed the 40 feet in the time it takes to read this sentence. I did not run shouting. I marched, but I marched the way we march when the drums are real, fast and square and absolutely silent, and the silence of it was more terrible than any shout, because the crowd had never seen one of the red statues move with intent, and the sight of it stopped the breath in their throats. I came up the cobbles and I put myself between the dark-coated man and the woman with the folder, my back to her, my face to him, and I stood. I did not strike him. I want that understood. My power has never been the striking. Any thug can strike. My power was that I was now a wall he could not get through without becoming, in front of 100 phones that had all just risen, exactly the thing he had spent the morning pretending not to be. I stood at attention an arm's length from his face, eyes level, and I did not say one word, and the not saying was the loudest thing in the square. He tried for a moment to keep his costume on. He said something about a misunderstanding, about a family matter, about the guard having no business, and his voice, which had been so gentle, climbed and thinned. And a gentle liar with a climbing thin voice is a thing a crowd can suddenly see through all at once, like a window when the light changes. The phones were up. The 2 old men had risen from their bench. And behind him, his young one with the phone and his third with the map had both stopped dead, because the script had a red wall in it now that the script did not allow for, and men who live by a script do not know what to do when the world goes off the page. Then the soft-shoed men came. You would not have picked them out of the crowd a minute before, a man in a good coat, another with a child's balloon tied to his wrist, a woman with a shopping bag. They had been in the square the whole time, drifting, fathers and shoppers and nobody, and at Wren's 2 quiet presses they had begun, without a sound, to close. They did not rush. They simply were suddenly there, one at each of the 3 men's shoulders, close and calm and unmistakable, and a quiet voice asked the dark-coated man if he would mind stepping aside for a word. The car in the side street, I learned later, had a 4th man in it and 2 of the watch already standing at its windows, and it never moved again under its own power that day. It was over in under a minute, and almost no one in the square understood what they had seen. A great stamp, A red coat crossing the stones, 3 men walking away between quiet strangers, a young woman white-faced against the railing. The tourists filmed the red coat, of course. By evening I was on 100 screens, the still guard who came alive. And not one of those 100 films showed what the morning had truly been, because the truth of it had happened in 3 words on a folded paper, and a glance held 1 beat too long, and a hand turned palm out against a thigh. I marched back to my post. That was the order, and I keep the order. The wall goes back into the wall. Behind me, the soft-shoed men were taking statements I would never hear, and the woman with the folder was sitting on the steps with a cup of something hot that someone had pressed into her hands, and her hands were shaking now that they were allowed to. The folder, I would learn, held the proof of a theft far larger than a folder, papers that named men who had counted on her never reaching anyone who could not be bought or frightened. She had reached one. She had reached the one man in the city whose entire trade is that he cannot be moved by money and cannot be moved by fear. And so the only thing left to do with him was to trust him. I want to be honest about the cost of what I did, because the films never show the cost, and a man who tells you a thing was easy is a man you should stop listening to. When I crossed those 40 feet, I broke the one order that the whole of my discipline is built to protect. The standing order is not a suggestion. It is the thing that makes a sentry worth posting at all, and I had violated it in front of 100 phones, and I knew, marching back, that there would be an accounting. There is always an accounting. The guard who is right and the guard who is wrong both face the same question afterward. Why did you leave your post? And the rightness is not decided by the guard. It is decided by men in a room who were not there, looking at the cold facts after the heat has gone out of them. So I stood the rest of that watch knowing that whatever I had saved, I might have spent my career to do it, and I found, standing there, that I did not mind. That surprised me. 19 years, a man builds his whole sense of himself on the post, on the not moving, on being the one who can be relied upon never to break. And I had just learned that I would break it again, the same way, for the same reason, without a half-second's hesitation, and that the part of me that grieved the broken order was smaller than the part of me that would have grieved a woman dragged into a car off the king's ground while a red statue watched and did nothing. I had found the floor of myself. Every man should be made to find it once. It is not where he thinks it is. The accounting came that evening, and I will tell you how it went, because it is the part of this the cruel, gentle men never understand. I was marched not to a reprimand but to the duty officer's room, and the duty officer was a captain I had stood under for 6 years, a man who had never once in those years given me a word that was not an order. He did not ask me why I left my post. He had already seen Wren's 2 presses logged at the brass panel, and the time of them, and he had already spoken to the soft-shoed men and to the woman with the folder, and so he knew the shape of the morning before I came through the door. He asked me one question. He asked whether, at the moment I stamped, I had believed a life was in immediate danger on the king's ground. I said I had. He wrote that down. Then he stood, which a captain does not do for a sentry, and he said that the order beneath the order had held, and that he would so report it, and that I was to say nothing of the affair to anyone, ever, because the woman's safety was not yet finished, and a guard who talks is a guard who gets someone killed. Then he sat back down and became a captain again, and told me to be on the gate at 6. That was all. No medal, no commendation read on parade, no line in any record that a stranger could ever find. The men who do this trade do not get those things, and would be suspicious of them if they came. What I got was the captain standing up. In 19 years, it is the only time I ever saw him do it, and I have thought about it more than I have thought about almost anything, because a captain standing up for half a second told me, in the only language we are allowed, that I had read the morning right. That is the whole of the reward, and it is enough, and a man who needs more than that should find another trade. The woman's part was not finished, the captain had said, and it was not. I learned the rest of it slowly, in pieces, over the weeks after, the way a sentry learns anything not by being told, but by standing where things are said and keeping a still face while they are said near him. The folder went where folders like that go. The men in it did not all run. Some of them were the kind who believe their names are too large to be touched, and those are always the most surprised. The dark-coated man at the Lion was not the head of it. He was the hand of it, the one sent to do the unspeaking work. And when the hand is caught, the head learns very fast how alone it is, because hands talk, and frightened hands talk fastest of all. The car in the side street and its fourth man unraveled the rest. By the turn of the season, there were quiet arrests in places that do not have arrests, and a great deal of money moved out of the dark and into the light, and a woman who had been told she would never reach anyone was reached past, and around, and through by every part of an institution that had decided, on the strength of 3 penciled words pressed into a glove, to put itself between her and the harm. That is what an institution is for, when it works. It is a wall 1,000 men thick, and on the morning it mattered the woman in the gray coat had found the one stone of it she could touch, and touched it, and the whole wall had turned. I stood the rest of my watch. The sun moved. The tide of visitors came and went, lifting their phones at the man in red who did not look back at them, and not one of them knew that an hour before, the man in red had broken every rule he lived by for a stranger he never spoke to. That is the part I carry. Not the stamp, not the crossing of the stones, the silence before it. The minutes of standing still with they mean her harm folded inside my fist, knowing and waiting, because a guardsman's first gift to the frightened is not his hands. It is his patience. A long time later, near the change of the guard, the woman with the folder came back. She had her color again, and a man from the watch at her shoulder who would see her safely on. She stopped in front of me the way the tourists stop, and for a moment I thought she would only look as they all look. Then she did a thing none of them ever do. She took a clean square of paper from her pocket, and she folded it once, and she reached up slow, so I could see it coming this time, so I would know it was a gift and not a theft, and she pressed it flat against the white of my glove and closed my fingers over it with both of her hands, gently, the way you close a book you mean to keep. Then she stepped back, and she gave me a small grave nod, and she walked out through the King's Gate into the safe street beyond it, the gate I had held for her without ever once leaving it, because the gate had never been the stone. The gate had always been me. I did not read her note on the post. I am not permitted, and besides, I did not need to. I knew already what a frightened person writes when at last they are not frightened anymore, and I was content to carry it unread against my palm until the sergeant marched us off and the day was mine again. When I unfolded it that night, it held 2 words, pressed deep with a hard pencil, the same hard hand that had written the first 3. Thank you. I have stood the King's Gate for 19 years. I have been spat at, screamed at, ordered, mocked, and filmed past counting, and I have stood through all of it without moving, because the not moving is the whole of what I am for. People think the discipline is the point. They think the marvel is the man who will not break. But the discipline was never the point. The discipline is only the wall, and a wall is built for one reason, which the tourists with their phones never guess and the cruel gentle men never believe until it is too late. A wall is built so that, on the one morning out of 10,000 when it matters, there will be something left standing between the frightened and the harm, something that did not run, did not bargain, did not look away, and could not be bought or frightened into stepping aside. I keep both notes folded in the same pocket over the breast, where a soldier keeps the things he means to die holding. 3 words in 2, the whole of the trade in 5. They mean her harm, thank you. That is the post. That has always been the post. Everything else is only standing still.